that time of week again. It is time for another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah, joined once again by Tim Martinez. And for those of us who follow high school sports, it's been a busy time in the calendar, not only because spring sports are heading toward their thrilling conclusion, but the WIAA's Representative Assembly voted on a plethora of amendments that are going to bring some big changes to a few high school sports policies that we are going to talk about. So Tim, for those of us who really like to get in the weeds on high school sports policy, Christmas arrived either early or late, depending on how you look at the calendar.
Yeah, well, actually early. I mean, I think during the process year to year, they typically do the voting process in early May, and for whatever reason, maybe some of these amendments, the changes that we're going to incorporate, they decided to move it up a month. So the voting process this year was done in the middle of April. So we got this news a little early. I think it's nice for us because, again, usually it comes out in May when we are busy doing postseason stuff and getting ready for the spring's postseason and state championships. So it's nice that it came at a time that we were able to get on it and report it and talk about it now.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk. I'll give you an idea about what topics we're going to address today and go more into details. We have a new sanctioned sport, flag football for girls, is coming. We have a very consequential transfer rule change that was passed. We have a mercy rule in soccer, and then we have a much talked about advisory vote on transgender athletes. But before we get into those individually, why don't you just run down kind of what the process is for an amendment getting proposed and then ultimately either accepted or rejected.
So anytime they have a change to the WIAA handbook, basically the rule book that rules over all the seasons and rules and stuff, in the fall, different schools or school districts will come together and they will sponsor proposed amendment changes that they would like to see changed and put into effect. They propose them. It goes in late in the year, in December. In January, there is a review process where it's called the Winter Coalition, where they look over the proposals and they make any changes, any wording that they need to make sure that it's clear, make sure it doesn't contradict with other rules that are in the handbook. And then it goes before the Representative Assembly, which is essentially sort of a legislative body of all the high schools and even middle schools, because the WIAA oversees both high school and middle school sports in the area, and those representatives will cast votes on these proposed amendment changes. So basically, like down here in Clark County, you might have the athletic directors from the Greater St. Helens Leagues get together, and they come up with a consensus on what they want their representative to vote for on these proposals. So then that representative will vote representing the schools and the leagues that they represent. So statewide, between middle school and high school, there are 53 members of the Representative Assembly, and to pass you need 60% vote, which is 32 votes. If the amendment impacts only high school sports, then that's 35 members, and you need 21 votes to pass the amendment. So that's where the process goes, and last week we found some results.
All right, well, one of the amendments that did pass was the sanctioning as an official WIAA sport of girls flag football. You mentioned needing that 20 or 21 vote threshold to pass. Flag football barely made it, passing 22 to 13, but it's very monumental for that sport, being that last time it came up before the Representative Assembly, it failed. But what is the girls' flag football season going to look like? We don't know for sure yet, because the ADs around the state are working on it. But you had a chance to catch up with Camas Athletic Director Stephen Baranowski, who kind of gave you a glimpse into the process that's currently underway.
Yeah, a lot of people had questions after the amendment was passed last week, and you know, a lot of the schools didn't have answers exactly, so they had questions as well. Over the weekend, the athletic directors around the state had a annual meeting where one of the top topics of discussion was flag football, and Stephen Baranowski said that there's around 100 schools statewide that are interested in adding flag football. They are interested in making this happen even next year, and so they were talking about, like, the first question was what season it's going to be played in. And from the amendment that was passed, it kind of looked like maybe spring was being offered, but there were also alternate seasons of fall and winter. Basically, they kind of left it up to the schools to figure out what made the most sense. And Stephen Baranowski was kind of leaning like he thought maybe spring might be the one that would work best, but when he got to this AD meeting, it was sort of very much in favor of winter season. Now, the sort of the growth of this sport and to make it a sanctioned sport is coming out of the Seattle school areas. The Puget Sound, they had a pilot program that was supported by the NFL and the Seattle Seahawks. And so those schools up in the Seattle, they've been playing flag football. I even remember I went up to like a by-district basketball playoff game at Mount Tahoma High School on a Saturday a couple years back. And as I was leaving the basketball game that started, in the morning or early afternoon, there were the fields and there were all these players on the field, and I didn't know what it was. Well, what it was flag football in February. They've been playing a winter season, and the reason why they prefer the winter season is field availability. In the fall you have football, you have girls soccer, and in the spring you have track and you have boys soccer, and here locally we also have girls lacrosse using those fields. And in the winter, there's nobody using those fields because they're all inside the gym or the wrestling room or gymnastics or bowling or swimming. So that's why the field availability is best in the winter. And then also from a participation standpoint, there are more athletes who would be available to do a new sport in the winter than there would be in the fall or spring because of the high participation in sports like volleyball and girls soccer in the fall, slow pitch, swimming, cross country, and in the spring you got track, you got fast pitch softball, tennis, and golf. But in the winter, it's basically basketball, wrestling, gymnastics, and bowling is the girls' sports. And gymnastics and bowling are kind of niche sports. It's kind of like the people they kind of get involved in those sports. And so they probably wouldn't be ones that would be attracted to going to another sport. So it looks like winter is one. It hasn't been decided. I think once everyone first figures out if they're going to be able to offer this next year, and once they figure out what schools are going to be able to offer, then they'll come together and they'll figure out what season makes the most sense. In some cases, in this first year out, maybe some leagues opt to do it in an alternate season in the winter and not take part of if there is a state tournament in this first year through, just to kind of get the ball rolling and then maybe move to the winter. But it really looks like it's going to be a winter sport. And I think and Steven said there's excitement and interest in what's going on in the sport.
Yeah, I think definitely there's momentum for that, and it has grown in support, definitely because of some of the, top-down, promotion of the sport from the NFL and whatnot. But I think as you see this roll out, it's really going to be, at least initially, centered around those programs and districts in Western Washington and up in the Seattle area that have already established a thing. I think for me, what's going to be interesting is to see in areas where maybe it doesn't have a foothold yet, how enthusiastic are districts going to be or schools going to be about unveiling a new sport in a time when budgets are such an issue? Was that something that Stephen talked about?
Well, there is grant money available from the Seahawks and the NFL, and he also mentioned that the cost of starting flag football is fairly minimal. It's just they need the flags and some jerseys, home and away, and they're going to use the fields that they have. I think the field that is like 50 yards long by 25 yards wide, which can be played sort of vertically across an athletic field like a football field. He was mentioning that up in Seattle, they often will play 3 games on a football field at the same time on a Saturday, JV and varsity and maybe a couple different teams. So there isn't a whole lot of capital investment into what would be needed to get this sport off the ground. It's just the usual stuff of they got to pay for coaches and officials and transportation and stuff like that. It might be where the established schools that have been playing this for a couple of years up in the Seattle area, if they do eventually have a state championship, And Stephen Baranowski says he wouldn't be surprised if we have a state tournament even as soon as next school year.
Wow.
It might just be like a single classification to start, but it might be something like what happened with slow pitch softball. So anyway, when they passed this, they said it was the first new sport passed since 1999. And when I read that off the WIAA release, I was like, really? First one? And then the new sports were like girls wrestling, which is like in 2005, 6. But that was just a break off of wrestling, so it wasn't a new sport. And then the other new sport was slow pitch softball, which they sanctioned back, I think, in 2017, 2018. But they used to have that up until about 2002. Before that, so it's kind of bringing back. But what we've seen with slow pitch softball is while it gains in popularity, like down here in Southwest Washington, where we had some good teams like Skyview and Union and Columbia River and Mark Morrison Longview and Ari Long. Then they go to state and they play these teams from Spokane or some Eastern, and those are the teams that win state every year. So it's like I think slow pitch softball for the east side of the state was something that they were well entrenched, and they have kind of built a program and they have attracted the players to be very successful. So I think it might be the same thing up in the Seattle area, where those teams are going to be the ones who are going to do very well at a state level, and it'll take a while for other areas to kind of build up and match that level. But there seems to be a lot of interest down here in Southwest Washington from big schools. Even some small schools are interested in making this work, so it'll be interesting to see how it comes together.
Well, I gather we might even get a sneak peek in May, or at the end of May, out at Camas as to what this might look like.
Yeah, Stephen Baranowski said that they are hoping to be able to put something together at Doc Harris Stadium sometime in late May, try to get maybe possibly 4 teams on the field from 4 different schools. And the idea is that it would be in late May, so that it's late enough to where kids who are already playing a spring sport might have had their season finished already. Maybe they were eliminated after the district tournament or district meet, and so they didn't make it to the final round of state, so they can come out for a week or two and get the basics of flag football, and then go out and play just to kind of see what it's all about. So we might be able to see this kind of low-key kind of showcase. And I've even heard that the schools from the north side of District 4, like Tumwater and North Thurston, and I think Kelso is going to participate in the thing that's going to happen up north the same time frame. So a lot of schools are doing this sort of beta testing this spring of the sport to kind of put it out there for people to see and figure out, if it's something they want to pursue. So,
well, it should be interesting. We haven't had a new sport in a while, so we'll be eagerly anticipating how that comes together. Another thing we're, I think, eagerly anticipating across the state was more clarity on how the WIAA was going to handle its policies regarding transfers. And it did that with its amendment that passed overwhelmingly 29-6. It allows for a one-time transfer once a student has established eligibility at a high school, provided it happens during a designated transfer time, and provided that student then sit out 40% of the subsequent season in their sport. Now, they'll have to have played that sport the previous year, so it's not like you can go into basketball or transferred to school for basketball and say, well, I've never done cross country before, but I got burned 40% of a season, so I'm going to come out and use that there. The WIAA, that was one loophole I think we were a little uncertain about, but the WIAA brought clarity on that. So one of the things that the WIAA made sure to make clear in announcing this change was that this is not a designated transfer portal. You have to transfer during a certain time, but they made very clear this is not a transfer portal. Why isn't it?
I think the part that was confusing, and I think even we were confused originally when the proposal came out. Yeah, there's this window of transfers like this. It's basically the summer months that you can make these changes. I think the window of transfer is trying to avoid people flipping schools in the middle of the school year. I talked to Stephen Baranowski about this as well, because it was another topic that came up at the AD's meeting over the past weekend. And he doesn't really think it's going to make a huge difference in the kids moving around, because basically what this rule is it allows a pathway for kids to remain partially eligible in cases that previously they would have been ineligible for the entire full year that after they transferred. So basically, if it's not a situation, if you have a kid who lives in, city A and they move over to city B, everyone moves, the whole family moves, and they have a new residence, you'll be eligible to play high school sports at the new school. That doesn't
Right
really
away.
right away. And that's the way it's always been, and that doesn't change this one. These are for people who are looking to get boundary exceptions, who are playing maybe outside of the school district boundary that they live in, and they were changing schools. And in those cases, a lot of those cases, you would have been ineligible for varsity play your first year in. This rule allows them to become eligible after sitting out the first 40% of the first season after you've made that transfer. So basically, if it's football, you're looking at 4 games, the first 4 games. If it's basketball, it's like the first 8, maybe 9 if a team's playing the foundation game. They play a 21st game, then the 40% moves up to the first 9 games. So it's really providing an opportunity for kids to remain eligible who wouldn't have been eligible previously.
Do you think this will have you said it won't have much effect, according to Stevens. How many of the transfers that we see, maybe in past years where we've noticed, hey, this kid was here 1 year and now they're over there, how many of those do you think would have been affected by this, or is it just hard to tell because we don't know the individual details?
Yeah, it's hard. We don't know the individual details, but those kids remained eligible.
Yes.
So I can't remember a situation where like a player that we were familiar with was at school A and now is at school B and is not playing because they had to sit out because they weren't eligible. We don't really hear of that or see that. So kids who move now that we see will still remain eligible under this new rule, and they probably wouldn't even be subject to this 40% sitting out. Again, most of those situations are kids or families who are just moving. They're just relocating. I was talking with Adam Matheson, the football coach at Camas, who's also the activities director at Camas, and was a longtime athletic director at Mountain View, so he's kind of known the rules. And he was saying that the current transfer rules, it kind of creates soft spot for the sort of the fringes on the outside of the general population. You have the very affluent, who are very easy for them to just go pick up and move and buy a new home or get a lease at someplace new, and it's easier for them to do it. And then you have the lower incomes who maybe live in apartments where they have a little bit more flexibility on the movement, although sometimes the lower income even moving is an expense, right. The deposits and all that kind of stuff. So it's and they're just trying to sort of even the field out a little bit more of that, it's you had J.C. Alexander, the Mountain View basketball coach, on a couple of weeks ago, and it's a complicated issue, and I think one of the things that people tend to overlook is that there's flexibility in the transfer rules because schools are trying to keep kids eligible to play. They want kids to play sports. They want participation. And so there are rules that allow you to change schools because they want to give parents the flexibility to choose the schools that they want their kids to go to. They want their families to be able to choose the programs that their kids are part of. Certain schools offer certain programs, and they want to provide that flexibility to keep kids in a positive educational environment. Some people are using that flexibility to improve their kids' athletic situation, and so it's just kind of the world we live in now. And there's this club sport culture,
yes,
that is kind of pervasive, that is leaked into the high school sports. It used to be, when like you and I grew up, we played sports. We played sports with kids who we knew. We grew up since elementary school, came up through middle school, and the whole idea of like, I'm going to go to this school because I played club with this player, and I want to continue to play club with that, was just something that we didn't really see a whole lot of when we were growing up.
Right, and I think that was apparent from the start that they wanted to, I think in this amendment, they wanted to find sort of a happy medium between clarifying some elements of the transfer situation, but still kind of giving the athlete and the families flexibility. If the main goal was just to say, hey, we've had enough of these super teams or anything like that, they would have taken a tack like maybe the state of Arizona does, where if you transfer, you're ineligible for the postseason.
Yeah, that was Adam Matheson. He mentioned that to me, and it was like, and that was interesting. That's an interesting consequence.
Yeah. Well, because then if you're a coach, you're like, I don't want this transfer kid because he's going to play, get involved in the system, and then we go to the state or the district tournament, and I don't have that kid on my roster anymore.
Yeah. So that was an interesting approach that Arizona took. And I think the biggest thing when I talk to ADs and coaches about this transfer proposal is like, we're going to pass this, because there was a committee that was formed to try to formulate a proposal that would, create the flexibility for parents to choose the school they want their kids to go to, and yet try to stem this moving for sports only issue. And so they're trying to find, and this is the solution that it came up with, but basically a lot of them are saying, hey, we need to do something.
Yeah.
Let's do something, let's run this out, and let's see what the impact is, positively or negatively, and then we can make adjustments again in a year or two down the road. And I think that's the approach that a lot of people want to take. Want to take a look to see what impact this has, and if there's more steps in one way or direction or the other that need to be happen further down the road.
Excellent. Another change coming to high school sports, a mercy rule in soccer. I don't know, are you a fan of mercy rules in other sports?
Well, yeah, because I'm a sports reporter and I like to go home soon, But it's a good thing because we've seen soccer games. I've seen a few this year. This year we've seen a lot this year where you see a score that gets reported and you're like, is that the actual score of the game? 12-0, 15-0, 18-0. And you think it's like, why don't you just call this game? I suppose you can't do the running clock in soccer because there's always a running clock in soccer. So I was surprised that there wasn't a mercy rule when I saw this come up on this docket. So the mercy rule, explained as it is, for high school sports, the match is 80 minutes long. Mm-hmm. So the mercy rule is that if one team is leading by 8 goals or more after 60 minutes, the match ends. So if it's an 8-0 game, early in the second half, and then the 60th minute hits, then it's just like, beep, game's over. And if it's less than 8 goal differential and the time goes past 60 minutes, and in the 65th minute they go up by 8, match is over. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good solution because, especially among the smaller schools, in the smaller schools, the roster is not as deep, as long, right? So, you can pull your starters, but you're probably still going to have some of your starters still on the pitch because you need 11 players on the field at the same time, and maybe you have a roster of 15 or 16 players. Well, there's going to be starters there, and sometimes even if you're a really good team, bringing those subs in doesn't really, prevent more goals from being scored unless you specifically tell a team players don't score a goal, which is almost kind of worse than letting them play.
Yeah, if you get in the habit of easing off the throttle and getting out of, because I think if you're a team that you're up 5 or 6 goals entering the second half, you're like, how do we best use this time? It's not just kind of going through the motions. You might want to work on a different focus or strategy or anything. But I'll tell you who I think is going to be the biggest fan of the soccer mercy rule, the goalkeepers on the winning team. How many times do you see a 10-0, 12-0 game and then number of reported goalkeeper saves 0 or 1? So I think there's going to be some goalkeepers who are glad to not just have to stand out there with not a lot to do.
And I think coaches on both sides are going to appreciate that. If you have a team that's struggling, you don't want to keep having teams pounding goals on you and demoralizing your team. And if you're on the winning side, you're kind of like, well, we don't want to make teams look bad out here. At the same time, we're trying to bring up younger players and give them, some experience. And it's really hard to tell, a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, don't play hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a bench warmer in basketball in high school. And I remember we're going into a game one time and we were up by like 10 or 12, and our coach asked us to go into a 4-corner offense. And I told my coach after the game, I was like, if you want to go into 4-corner offense, that's fine. Just don't put me in, because I want to play when I'm in there. You know?
Yeah, you might have a freshman or an underclassman who doesn't get in the game very often, but he or she is trying to make the argument why they should be part of that. Maybe the starting lineup next year. And so yeah, it's not fair to those kids to say back off. But I think. I don't recall any instance where we've heard like, oh, they ran up the score. There's times when certainly it appears that way, but it's more like you said, the kids are trying to have a quality experience out there and work on different things, and you don't do that by kind of going through the motions.
And I think the worst thing you want in a soccer match is frustrated players who are losing, because that's when you can you get hard tackles and things. They're just frustrated out there, and I think it keeps everyone safe if we say, all right, this match has been decided, and they played 60 minutes, which is probably the most they're going to get out of that match anyway. So I think it's a good rule, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing that we don't see as many lopsided scores going forward.
Yes. The amendment, or it wouldn't be an amendment in this case, the advisory vote that probably got the most attention heading into this representative assembly is actually the one that has kind of the least consequence, because it is an advisory vote, but boy, has it been a political football, this issue of transgender athletes in sports. And initially, I think the WIAA was going to consider an amendment proposal put forth largely by schools on the east side of the district that would limit participation in girls' sports to biological females. They made that an advisory vote, saying, and the WIAA was very clear on this, saying that we are not going to act on this in a way that goes against state law, and in Washington state, it is illegal to discriminate based on gender identity. So WIAA is like, regardless of how you feel about this, and there's certainly strong opinions on both sides, arguments to be made, certainly for having girls' sports being biological females only. But what the WIAA said is, our hands are tied. So there's no use in voting on an amendment that we aren't going to enforce because it runs counter to state law. Now that might change, either the state law is going to change down the road, or the feds get involved and it gets settled in court. But what the WIAA said is, regardless of how this is, we're just going to take your advice, and the vote failed by one vote, I think. But this issue isn't going away. Where do you think it goes from here?
I was curious to know, because so the amendment was made, the proposal was made back in December, and then it went through the Winter Coalition, where they make changes and things in January. It really wasn't until, I think, March until they finally got the lawyers involved from the WIAA, and they said, yeah, this is going to go against state law, so we can't implement this rule. And the actual fact is even if the WIAA hadn't done that, it wasn't going into effect, because someone would have brought some legal action. I mean, there are states that have passed actual state laws sort of prohibiting transgender athletes from participating in girls' sports, and those are hung up in court. They're hung up in court, and they've been hung up for a couple of years. So the change going to happen going forward wasn't going to happen in one way or the other. I'm curious to know how it affected the vote in any way, right? Like once they made the decision in March or early April that this was going to be just an advisory vote, which is just sort of a straw poll, did some people decide to vote against it because, well, this is not going to make any difference, so what's the point? I'll vote against it. Or were there people who were like going, I don't know where we are on this, but I since it's only a straw poll, I think it's an issue that we need to look at, and so we'll vote for it so that we can maybe advance the conversation forward and try to figure out some other solutions. Who knows how it affected the vote? So it was interesting that 58 point something percent of the representatives voted in favor of what would be this proposal. And that's, I think the polls that we've seen, just from general public, that it's between 60 and 70% people say that they are in favor of not allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' sports. So, I mean, it kind of aligns with that to an extent. So,
and I think from Washington's perspective, in a way, this state and the WIAA is fortunate because the whole intersection between the feds and the states, that issue is kind of working in other states right now. You have the Trump administration suing Maine. You have, I believe, a lawsuit against the OSAA in Oregon from the Trump administration, and so those things are going to kind of work themselves out in court and give some clarity maybe until maybe a new administration comes in 4 years. But anyway, I just don't see the issue going away, and it's going to be one of those things where I think that the most important part is to kind of be respectful and have dialogue and to hear from all sides. That's certainly how we've committed to covering it.
Yeah, it's one of these issues that normally when you have issues that I brought forward in amendments like this, there are pros and there are cons, and then usually there's a compromise that gets worked out, something that it's in the middle that doesn't suit all the needs of the people who are in favor and doesn't suit all the needs of the people, and that's kind of how our society works. You may come up with a compromise. This issue, it is very difficult to find middle ground. If you come out and say that there are good points to be made on both sides of this issue, you will make zero friends because the both sides will. I can't believe you said that there are points to be made on both sides of this issue. So it is just a firecracker of an issue out there, and as long as I think. As long as this continues in the national debate and the state debate, it'll always be out there. And as long as there are, and unfortunately, I think as long as there are transgender athletes participating in girls' sports, it becomes, it'll continue to remain out there. And I just hope that those kids aren't the ones who are taking the bulk of the dissatisfaction of this. Because, at the end of the day, they're kids. This is something that needs to be resolved at a higher level.
Well, and we've had instances in the state of Washington, track and field and cross country especially, where you've had transgender athletes place very high, even making the podium at last year's state track and field meet. And I thought what happened there, certainly, there's people that were frustrated, including some of the athletes, but to boo that athlete on the podium, your issue, if you really want to enact change, your issue should be with the state law. Use that energy toward changing state law, not booing a kid. That's where I come down on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a reason that you ought to be booing a kid in any circumstance, even if they commit like a hard foul or do something unsportsmanlike. At the end of the day, these are kids, and in this situation, you have a kid who's competing and following the law, following the rules, and not doing nothing against the rules. The rules allow this to happen,
Yeah,
and so you don't take it out on the kid. If you have frustrations, you take it out with the system and the administration and the law, and you generate it from that way. So I think this issue definitely came here in the state of Washington from the state track that happened last May, in which we had a transgender student become a state champion. That's something where people will just jump onto and say, look, this is such an injustice because they're a state champion. If the student had been 5th or 6th or 4th, it maybe had raised the interest rate as high, but Yeah, but now, we have other stories and coming around that, we have players that are saying that who won't play a game because they suspect there's a transgender player on the other side, and it's just kind of devolving into some ugliness. And so it would be nice to have sort of a solution, but I just don't see that one's going to be coming anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. Interesting points, obviously, for a very divisive issue. But yeah, we're headed toward some pretty exciting times here in the spring sports. Meg Wachnick and I will be huddling this next week on Varsity360 to talk about some amazing feats in track and field that have happened this year. That's going to be, I think, one of my most eagerly anticipated state championships this year, with some of the athletes that have just had some, statewide success that's on a level we haven't seen a lot of.
Yeah, it's also a change to the postseason this year. The way they're finishing, the softball, tennis, and golf will be concluding the week of Memorial Day weekend, or the week preceding Memorial Day. But baseball, soccer, and track and field will happen the weekend after Memorial Day, which will be a first, because Memorial Day was always the traditional final weekend of high school sports in Washington. So they kind of staggered them. So hopefully that presents a situation where athletes in those sports will have a little bit more chance to have a spotlight on them. And in the past, the state track meet, we sent like one person to cover that, and this year we might have the opportunity, especially with so many outstanding athletes, to be able to send multiple people to the state meet. So we're interested to see how that all kind of unveils.
Star Trek, I remember the golden age of that, when we'd team up and have a whole crew there for the News Tribune when I was there. That was the big show.
It used to be, you might remember, it was like the late 90s into the early 2000s, they used to take the spring championships and they used to move it
around.
It was
down here.
Yeah, it was down here for a while. So like all the state championships are down here in Southwest Washington. Other times it would be in Tacoma, and other times it was in Yakima. It was interesting. And then they decided to put all these championships at places that different parts around the state, which means that we go everywhere from Bellingham to Tacoma to Yakima. I was in the Tri-Cities last spring, and we have state championships down here in Washington with the 3A tennis at Vancouver Tennis Center. So, I think state golf, I think the 4As are up in the DuPont Tumwater area. The 3As are east Spokane. I think the 2As are also west side, and the 1As are east. So even that gets spread around a bit. And we've had the state golf championships down here in Clark County about 10, 15 years ago, where all of them were down here at courses here, and that was kind of fun. So, it's a fun time. It's a fun time to get out, and when the weather is good, get out and watch some spring sports.
All right. Well, be sure to follow along on 360pets.com.